stilted, isn't it? It is. It's slower.
Yeah, I was like, I know you didn't get a lot of sleep last night, but that is very.
I had to change the battery or change the time of the forward. Okay, call this meeting of the Ventura County Local Agency Formation Commission for Wednesday, April 20, 2016 to order.
Rise, please, and join me in the salute to the flag. Hand over your heart. Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So just in time for the roll call. Well, is Bruce is not going to make it today?
As far as I know, he's going to be here.
Oh, okay. Otherwise, we would sub. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Yeah.
Can't hear her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't hear her.
Commissioner Freeman.
Here.
Commissioner Parks.
Here.
Commissioner Parvin.
Here.
Commissioner Zaragoza.
Here.
Chair Morehouse.
Here.
Alternate Commissioner Rooney.
Here.
All right. We'll move to our agenda review. Is there anything that anybody wants to change, move, anything for the orders of business? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to commission presentations and announcements. Is there anything that any commissioner wishes to share for the greater good? I think I've announced to many of you, even the last time, the Southern California Association of Governments General Assembly is coming up May 5th and 6th, and would urge you to be there. I think it's going to be a pretty good program this year. One of the keynote speakers, besides Dan Walters, if you've heard Dan a number of times, which I have, my favorite curmudgeon. But there's also an interesting presentation that's going to happen. Our current president, Cheryl Villegas Walker from El Centro, has been reading a book, and it's called Game Changers, I believe it's called, and it's about 12 major votes in the state that have occurred over the history of the state that changed the dynamic. And so the author of that is going to be there. It should be very interesting to hear from that individual, and I think it can be there for book signing as well. So you might want to attend. But anyway, you can go to the SCAG website, scag.ca.gov, and General Assembly's on there. So nothing else from anybody? All right. With that then, public comments. This is the portion of our agenda where we offer interested parties with comments and things that are not agendized. I do not have any speaker cards. Anybody that I'm missing on? Okay, well then we will move to our consent items on the calendar. First is the minutes of the LAFCo meeting on March 16th, our regular meeting. The minutes of the LAFCO March 24th special meeting, which was on the Agricultural Mitigation Workshop Part 2. And number 9 is our budget to actual report for March 2016. The action there is recommended to approve item 7, 8, and receive and file item 9.
Commissioner Morehouse? Sorry for the interruption.
Yes,
Before any action is taken on the consent items, alternate Commissioner Mary Ann Rooney should sit as a full voting member in place of Commissioner Dandy, who's absent.
Okay. Yes, please join us. I'll make you sit down at the little kids' table. Now you're gonna leave alternate member Ramirez down there by herself, but it's the luck of the draw.
So you need a second on that?
I missed who gave me the motion.
Oh,
Okay. Commissioner Freeman made the motion, and
Second
by Commissioner Zaragoza. Mm-hmm. And we'll wait to finish musical chairs here, and then we'll call the roll. The motion was made by Commissioner Freeman, and it was seconded by Zaragoza for the consent. So, you ready to call the roll? Okay, thank you. You're on.
Sorry.
You're ready to call the roll? Sure. Okay, please do.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman.
Yes.
Commissioner Parks.
Yes.
Commissioner Parvin.
Aye.
Commissioner Zaragoza.
yes.
Chair Morehouse.
Yes?
Alternate Commissioner Rooney.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. And FYI, because we have started recording these now or broadcasting, we're going on Granicus, so Rochelle's going to have a little difficulty kind of maneuvering the system. So there seems to be kind of a delay going on up here. You understand there's a technical reason for that. Okay, with that, we will move to our public hearing items, and number 10 is the review and re-adopt the LAFCo fee schedule for fiscal year 2016-17. And with that, Mr. Olma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are proposing no changes to the current fee schedule. The fee schedule was updated. The hourly fee for staff time was raised last year, as was the overall application fees by $100. We're not proposing any changes to the fee schedule for this fiscal year. So we do recommend that the Commission determine that no changes to the fee schedule are necessary and adopt the resolution stating such. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, any questions of our staff on that?
Move
Okay.
approval.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, then we will have.
For, and Parvin. Zaragoza Parvin.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. We're going to keep Rochelle moving several different spots. Okay, if you would please take the roll. Roll.
We're ready. We're ready.
Yeah.
That's all right. We won't have to do that each one.
Oh, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none? Okay, very good. Then that passes unanimously. All right. The next item on our agenda then is the item 11, which is a proposed budget for fiscal year 2016-17.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the recommended proposed budget for fiscal year 2016-2017, item 11 on your agenda. So LAFCo law does provide that LAFCo must adopt a proposed budget by May 1st and a final budget by June 15th. This, of course, is the proposed budget in order to meet that May 1st deadline. And this is the recommended proposed budget. So I want to start off with a review of the current fiscal year, 2015-2016, and I'll start with expenditures and then talk about revenue. And this will be very brief. So the expenditures are divided up into three categories. These are total salaries and benefits, total services and supplies, and then contingencies. Now, for total salaries and benefits, the adopted budget provided for about $497,000. We are projecting to expend about $475,000 for a savings of about $22,000. For total services and supplies, the adopted budget for the current fiscal year allocated about $162,000. We are projecting expending about $146,000 for a savings of about $16,500. Regarding contingencies, the Commission adopted $19,777 for contingencies for this current fiscal year. We are projecting expending none of that for a savings of $19,777. So total expenditures, the adopted budget, near $679,000. We are projecting to expend about $21,000 for a net savings of a little over $58,200. So that's expenditures. Regarding revenues, again, three categories: interest earnings, other revenue, and other governmental agencies. The adopted budget estimated $2,500 in interest earnings. We do anticipate receiving $2,500 in interest earnings for no change, no deficit or savings there. Regarding other revenue, this is revenue from application fees. The adopted budget estimated that we were going to receive about $25,000 in fee revenue. We fell short, or we are projecting to fall short to only about $20,000 for a deficit of about $5,000. The funds from other governmental agencies, these are the county, the 10 cities, and the 30 independent special districts. The adopted budget anticipated the need for $506,477. We are projecting that amount. We have already received that amount, so we know it. Again, no savings or deficit there. So regarding total revenue, just short of $604,000. We are projecting nearly $599,000. There will be a deficit of $5,000. So in summary, projected expenditure savings, $58,202. Projected revenue shortfall of $5,000 for a projected fund balance of $53,202.
Mr. Chair, on the savings, Kai, the $22,000, is that because you have not reached the top of the range or in the initial?
There's a couple of reasons for that. We fund for all possibilities, and that includes like cashing in vacation time for salary. So less vacation time was cashed in this fiscal year than we funded for. So that's the primary reason for that savings.
Okay, good. Okay.
Are you anticipating less work than you've had in the past? I mean, I know it's stated in there that the preponderance of our costs really is staff time and benefits, but are you just anticipating we'll have less applications than we've had in the past and less workload? Or?
Yeah, as far as the projected revenue?
Yeah.
Yes, we will be projecting for next fiscal year $20,000, similar to what we received this fiscal year. Yes, we do anticipate fewer applications overall, particularly complex applications that resulted in higher fees. So we are being conservative with that estimate for next fiscal year.
Okay.
And I'll go over that here in a minute for the proposed budget.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on this? Okay, proceed.
Okay. So now I'll get into the actual proposed budget for next fiscal year. And again, this is divided into expenditures and revenue. And I'll start with expenditures. And as I mentioned, there's 3 categories of expenditures. These are salary and employee benefits, services and supplies, and then contingencies. And I'll talk a little bit about each of these. So regarding salaries and benefits, total salaries and benefits for the adopted budget for this fiscal year, as I mentioned, was close to $497,000. We are proposing for next fiscal year an increase to $506,750. This is an increase of $9,800 or approximately 2%. Now, the reason for the increase is primarily it's for regular salaries, this account code. The adopted budget allocates $320,000 for regular salaries. We're proposing that it be increased by $10,000 to $330,000. And this is an increase of a little over 3%. Now, the increase in this account code is primarily due to prospective merit increases for staff, and then, of course, those related benefit accounts. So under the county's management resolution, which your staff falls, it does provide for annual merit increases. So, and the increase in regular salaries would, of course, increase those associated benefit categories as well. So that's the primary reason for that $10,000 increase. Now, the overall increase is offset by some decreases in other account codes, and that's primarily in the account code called Management Retiree Health Benefit. For the current fiscal year, it was $14,500. We're recommending it be reduced to $10,000 or $4,500 less. Now, this decrease in the Management Retiree Health Benefit is due to the fact that the previous executive officer who retired about 1.5 years ago, she was receiving this benefit for a period of time, but that benefit ended December of last year, so it no longer has to be funded. The previous clerk office manager who retired a little over 1 year ago, she will be receiving that benefit through 2017. So we do still have to fund it for that amount, and we'll have to fund it for part of the subsequent fiscal year as well. And then it's going to go away entirely. Okay.
Question here, Member Ramirez. Carmen?
Thank you. Just a quick question about the retiree health benefit. It's a defined time. It's 1 year after you retire, or
right. What it is for county employees who were hired before 2005. For every 5 years of employment, they received 1 year of this benefit in retirement. So it is for a defined time. The clerk office manager, she had worked for the county for nearly 20 years or 15 years, so she would get 3 to 4 years of this retiree benefit. And that's why the commission needs to fund that through 2017.
And the retirees are PERS employees, right?
They're with the county retirement system,
retirement.
yes.
Oh, okay. And that's a little bit different. Thank you. So there's no, not to get too much into detail, but in terms, I just asked as I'm curious because our city is going through this. Do the employees pay a portion of their pension?
We pay half of the cost to our pensions.
Is that a new thing, or has that always been that
That
way?
was implemented about 2 years ago, I believe.
Okay, and prior to that?
Prior to that, the county paid 100% of it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions on this? All right. Continue.
And when I say LAFCo, or the county, I'm referring to LAFCO here. Okay, we're funding it, county's paying it. Okay, services and supplies. For the current year's adopted budget, there was $162,250 put towards services and supplies. For the proposed next fiscal year's budget, it's about the same. It's a very modest increase of $550 or less than 0.3%. Now, I'll talk a little bit of, there were some increased costs that were passed along to LAFCo. However, these were offset with some decrease in expenditures, and I'll just touch briefly on the larger ones. So there was an increase in the account code toward cost allocation plan charges from $15,800 to $18,250. This is a charge that the county charges. We have no control over the amount of this charge, and it's for services that are provided to LAFCO and every agency, actually, for general services, county CEO services, human resources, assessors, those kind of things. So the county sets that charge. Also, there was an increase in county GIS charges. As you know, the GIS is contracted to provide us with mapping and also to maintain the official boundary map records for the commission, and that is increasing from $21,500 to $24,500. Now, fortunately, those increases are going to be offset by decreased expenditures in other account codes. This will be a $1,000 decrease in furniture and fixtures, as well as in education and conferences. And we also have a decrease in the amount for conferences and seminars from $19,000 to $15,500. This is due primarily to the fact that the LAFCo annual conference is going to be held locally in Santa Barbara, reducing the travel costs. So, any questions on services and supplies?
Question? Okay.
Okay. And then contingencies. So for the current year's budget, the commission adopted $19,777 toward contingencies. This was 3% of total expenditures. For the proposed fiscal year, we are recommending an increase to $33,478. This represents a 5% of overall expenditures, and this is an increase of $13,701. Now, this is less than what the commission policy mandates, and that's 10% of total expenditures for contingencies. That would be close to $67 if the commission were to adhere to that. So we are recommending a lower amount, again, to reduce the costs to our funding agencies. So though that it's going to be less than 10%, there are still going to be funds available for the commission to cover contingencies that might exceed this $33,000. And that would be located in the unassigned fund balance, which we are projecting to be $254,000 at the end of this fiscal year.
Chair Morehouse.
Yes.
So I'm not inclined to violate our policy mandates. When you said here that we're going against our policy mandates, I'd like to know the justification for that.
The justification would be that there is additional monies available for contingencies if they do in fact exceed this $33,000. This projected unassigned fund balance, there's about $150,000 basically unassigned, unencumbered, and outside of LAFCO policies that can be used for contingencies. So it's not that there's not enough money to cover that 10%, it's just located in a different fund.
Then why not go ahead and put it in the contingency where our policy dictates? Just to show that there's money extra, that's great. To openly go against our policy just rings bad public policy from me as a decision maker. So,
Right.
If you can allocate it and put the mandate in there and then reduce it in the unassigned, that would make me more comfortable.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's kind of staff's goal. That's what we're working toward. As I mentioned, 3% was adopted for this fiscal year and 3% last year. And my goal was to increase that a little bit every year to get back up to that 10% and at the same time reduce the available fund balance. So the goal is to do that over a period of years, not all at once, so as to not increase the allocations by the funding agencies significantly during 1 year, just to have a gradual increase if necessary.
So, Mr. Chair, what that does, it helps the clients.
Right.
Basically,
right.
yeah.
Yes, the commission can, increase this amount to the full 10%.
And
That cost could be, placed on the funding agencies in one large chunk, or it can be smaller chunks over the
By
years.
phasing it in, it helps the.
Right, right. And we would be paying down or decreasing the amount of available fund balance at the same time.
Sorry, I'm going
Go
to
ahead.
stick on this
Okay.
just a little bit longer. If we are going to go against our policy mandates, then I think that we need to put that in there openly in the budget for this coming year.
It is discussed in the budget message, and it is noted in the budget itself in the table, this amount, that this is 5%.
I
So
think
it is
it does
well
beg a
documented.
question, though, for clarification about the unassigned fund balance and its function. I mean, there are routine things that this organization has to do. You've always got the sphere of influence and all the other annual things you're supposed to be reviewing, and then you do it periodically. But when you have that kind of unassigned fund balance sitting there, the member agencies might say, well, you're sitting on a pot of money, and, why should we pay you any more dues, and what are you doing with that?
Right.
So I think for clarification, we need to talk a little bit about what that function is, and then I think Alternate Commissioner Rooney raises a decent question. If our mandated contingency is $66,000, if we could shift some funds, what would be the impacts of shifting that out of the unassigned fund balance in relationship to the function of the fund balance?
Well, if you turn to page 40 of the packet, there's a table there about fund balances. Right here, there.
Okay.
So the middle column, that's the projected fund balance for the end of this fiscal year. And I'll talk about this a little bit too later in my presentation. But you'll see that the fund balance for the middle column, we do anticipate appropriating $65,000 to apply to next fiscal year's budget. That's what's reflected in that first column there, $65,000. And again, that's to use some of the money that we have available to reduce the funding from the other agencies. We have a litigation reserve of $100,000. That is consistent with commission policies that be reserved. Then for the unassigned fund balance, commission policies mandate that we have 60 days working capital. At least 60 days of working capital come out of that unassigned fund balance. That's 143. And then the unassigned fund balance, that's the available money to be used for contingencies should we need one in excess of this $33,000. So it's $150,000. Now we're putting some fund balance toward next year's budget. So if you look over in the right-hand column, you'll see that the unassigned fund balance is going to be reducing down to $136,899. So part of that reason is that the contingency is being increased to $33,000. We can continue to increase the contingencies to $10,000, but then that unassigned fund balance will be decreasing. So my plan was to do that gradually.
Thoughts, feedback, input? If you're satisfied with that, then we'll let it go. If there's something you think we should
I guess
make
my
an action to
question-
shift, then we should do that.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So where in this proposed budget does it indicate that we go against the policy of the commission?
On page 32, it discusses contingency. And the budget message is part of the budget, and that's what would be adopted by the commission.
Okay, so it says you're talking about contingencies?
Mm-hmm.
So in accordance with the budget policies, the budget should provide for the contingencies unless the commission deems a different amount is appropriate. So because we're taking action, then this commission is deeming that appropriate?
Yes, essentially, yes.
So you have to read into that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And the purpose is to reduce the fees that the member agencies have to pay next year.
Correct. Well, the reason that we're recommending appropriating $65,000 of the available fund balance is to decrease the amount that the agencies need to allocate.
Right.
So, right.
I don't think they would complain.
No, I don't either.
No, I think that's beneficial. Okay, well,
Okay.
as long as we understand the rationale, is everyone fairly content with the line of logic here? Okay.
I just wonder if there isn't some way, if someone was just, like you said, looking at this, they wouldn't understand it from, say, some other payee agency. Is there a way to integrate a comment within the budget itself and not in the narrative?
Not, well, this entire thing comprises the budget. I don't know how we would include that in the table without, I think, convoluting the information in the table.
I suppose you could, I don't know if you could, can you asterisk somewhere in the table and refer back to the discussion you've got us back to on page 32?
Okay. Sorry, that's Omar from the Auditor Controller's Office. Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, again, it's just for the logic to follow so that anybody participating won't be any more confused than we are. Okay. Thank you. Okay, proceed.
Okay. So this is just a summary of expenditures adopted current fiscal year 679, projecting 620. Total for the proposed is 703,000, a little over. The proposed total expenditures for next fiscal year represents a 3.5% increase from the current fiscal year's adopted budget. So we're looking at a 3.5% increase overall. Okay, financing sources. There are three categories of financing sources. One is fund balance, which we were just discussing, miscellaneous revenue, which is interest earnings and application fees, and revenues from other agencies. This is the fund balance that we were just discussing. And I noted, we are planning on, well, the recommended budget would appropriate $65,000 of fund balance to go toward next year's budget, so I won't spend any more time on that. Miscellaneous revenue, interest earnings, and application fees. The adopted budget anticipated $2,500 in interest earnings. We are projecting to receive $2,500 in interest earnings. However, the proposed budget anticipates only $1,000. And we did this because we have not reached that $2,500 for several prior years. So we just started being a little bit conservative there. Application fees, as we discussed, the adopted budget anticipated $25,000. We project $20,000, and we are proposing $20,000. What we did was we sat down and we looked at all of the anticipated applications that we are likely to be receiving, and we estimated what that would be, and we came up with closer to $20,000. So, total revenue from miscellaneous sources: $27,500 adopted, $22,500 projected, and $21,000 proposed. Okay. The final category of financing sources is from other governmental agencies. These are, of course, the county, the 10 cities, and the 30 independent special districts. And I just want to clarify, these are the 30 independent special districts, not dependent special districts. So the adopted budget anticipated revenue of $576,477,000, or $192,159 from each of the three categories. We are proposing an increase of 7% for each of the funding categories. What this results in is $13,517 increase for each category, for a total increase of $40,551. Now, just a little bit of explanation. This amount would be split up among the 10 cities, as well that this amount would be split up among the 30 independent special districts. And that's determined by the amount of revenue. So that's what we're proposing.
Sure. Alternate Commissioner Ramirez.
Thank you. Just for my clarification, the total amount is what it is. Mm-hmm. What's the formula to divide? Is it based on population or activity?
It's based on revenue. So the city with the highest revenue for, I guess it's fiscal year 13-14, would have the highest proportion.
Revenue from?
Total revenue.
So even a smaller city than, say, Oxnard could pay more, theoretically?
Yeah, if they had more revenue than Oxnard, they could, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. This is just a summary of revenues, and it reflects here the $65,000 in appropriated fund balance, the $21,000 from miscellaneous revenue, the $617,028 from other governmental agencies for a recommended proposed total of $703,028. Questions? Okay. And so our recommendation is that the Commission adopt the attached resolution approving the proposed budget for fiscal year 2016, and then we will return probably at next month's meeting with a recommended final budget.
Okay, any additional questions of staff?
Could you go back to the slide where it shows the expenses and the revenues together for the total budget?
I don't think I have a one comparing the two.
So
There
what?
was total expenditures.
There's
and then-
expenditures, and
yes.
then where's the revenue?
Where's the revenue?
Does the revenue equal the expenditures?
Yes.
For zero?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, further questions? Thank you for walking us through that. So with that, I will entertain a motion for staff recommendation, and I'm presuming that that would include our suggestion, urging, demand, that you put a footnote in there somewhere for
Absolutely.
the readers.
I'll move for approval.
Okay, I have a motion by Freeman, second by Zaragoza. Does this require a roll call vote because it's financial? Okay, then all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? That passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, so we've got through the monetary part, except for the item number 12 is the audited financial statements for fiscal year ended June 30th. And for that, staff again. All right.
So in October of last year, the Commission approved a professional services agreement for audit services with Vavrinic, Trine, and Day Company, known as VTD, to audit the fiscal year 2014-15 finances. And the audit was completed in March, and Kanali with VTD is here today to discuss that with you. I'll turn it over to Kanali.
All right, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, good morning, Commissioners. My name is Kanali Sukasam, and I'm with Vavrinic, Trine, Day and Company. We performed our audit of the financial statements of the Ventura Local Formation Commission for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2015, and have issued an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion, which is the highest level of assurance on the financial statements. Also, I'm happy to report that there are no disagreements with management or staff during the course of the audit. Lastly, I'd like to thank Commission staff. We appreciate the opportunity of serving as the auditors of LAFCo, and would like to thank Commission staff for their cooperation in the audit process. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. It's nice to, all of us sit on other boards and commissions, and sometimes when you come back with an audit, you have a qualified or some other. It's so nice to see one that's so squeaky clean almost.
So we have a perfect audit?
It
There are no findings.
sounds that way. And
That's excellent.
yeah, it is. Even for the agencies we sit on sometimes, you keep tweaking, and they always find something else. So it's nice to see one come through so clean. So any other questions of our auditor? Yes, Alternate Commissioner Ramirez.
Just quickly, actually, for Kai, who does our finance, accounting, reporting, et cetera? Is it the county? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
You
Any
need a
additional
motion?
questions? Okay, I think we have an action on this, and that's just a receive and file. Can I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Parvin, second by Zaragoza. Receive and file, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, firm. And that brings us to item number 13 for action, which is the Commissioner's Handbook, Section 1.413. LAFCo is a responsible agency, and this is kind of a follow-up to our previous discussions about how we deal with ag mitigation measures. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is, item number 13. It's regarding potential changes to Handbook Section 143. And that's, of course, if the commission gives us direction to move forward with this item. So a little bit of background. As you'll recall, in September 10th of last year, the commission conducted an agricultural mitigation workshop, and the purpose of that was for the commission to receive information regarding the potential development of policies that would require or encourage agricultural mitigation for the conversion of agricultural lands. The commission heard from staff, from legal counsel, and various other interested parties regarding mitigation measures. What was discussed was what constitutes agricultural land for LAFCo purposes, legal issues that might accompany the adoption of ag mitigation policies, the amount of ag conversion in the county, and then we heard from state and local officials about various forms of agricultural mitigation and how they operate. Following that workshop, the commission again considered the item in October of 2015. However, in lieu of taking any action, the commission directed staff to arrange for a subsequent workshop to receive additional information and provide an opportunity for stakeholders to provide further input. That second mitigation workshop was held on March 24th of this year. We termed that Ag Mitigation Workshop Part 2. And the additional information that was provided there was information on the policies, the ag mitigation policies of other LAFCOs. So at that meeting, following testimony from the public, the commission directed staff to provide it with policy options to encourage lead agencies to consider mitigation measures for the loss of agricultural land in their environmental documents that they are preparing that LAFCO would be expected to use in subsequent LAFCO action. The commission directed that these policies be included within the commission's administrative supplement to the California Environmental Quality Act. And because it's within those guidelines, I wanted to give you a brief overview of the CEQA process as it relates to a responsible agency. So under CEQA, a lead agency is the agency with the principal responsibility of approving a project, and they have the responsibility of preparing the environmental document. A responsible agency is an agency that's not the lead agency but still has some type of discretionary authority over some aspect or aspects of the project. Now, LAFCO typically serves as a responsible agency during the CEQA process. For instance, a city or a special district seeking LAFCO approval of, say, a sphere amendment or annexation or out-of-agency service agreement will typically serve as the lead agency. LAFCO would be the responsible agency. That's the overwhelming majority of the time. Now, under CEQA, responsible agencies such as LAFCO are required to participate in the environmental review process conducted by the lead agency. For instance, LAFCO is required to respond to consultation requests by the lead agency. These are typically known as scoping meetings, the scoping process. Also, LAFCO is required to respond for notices of preparation of EIRs. This is where the lead agency sends out a notice saying, we're going to prepare an environmental document for this project. What would you like us to look at? What should be included in the EIR? And then 3, CEQA provides that responsible agencies should review and respond to draft environmental documents. And then the lead agency must consider these comments and include the comments of a responsible agency within the EIR. Now, that's in a nutshell. There's a lot of other provisions that I won't subject you to today, but that's kind of the nutshell process for a responsible agency. Now, the commission adopted provisions to provide further guidance for LAFCO staff during the CEQA process. And the commission did that in the administrative supplement to the Environmental Quality Act guidelines. This is found under Division 1, Operational Rules and Regulations, Chapter 4. Now, the role of a responsible agency, for LAFCO as a responsible agency, is outlined in Section 143. And this entire chapter is attached to your staff report for reference. So for this, the comment period for lead agency environmental documents, kind of what I talked about in CEQA, commission policies provide further direction. And again, in a nutshell, it provides that the executive officer shall respond in writing to any request for consultation from the lead agency. After receiving an NOP, or notice of preparation, the executive officer will prepare and transmit written comments to the lead agency. For draft environmental documents, the executive officer shall provide a written response to the lead agency regarding the adequacy of the document for use by LAFCo. And then finally, this section provides a list of topics that should be included and discussed in the environmental document. And it was this list that the Commission directed be increased to reflect potential policies for ag mitigation. So what this list says, this is verbatim from the Commissioner's handbook. It says an environmental document that is being prepared for subsequent LAFCO action should include the following: cumulative and regional impacts, growth-inducing impacts, impacts to public services, conversion of prime agricultural lands to urban uses, and protection and preservation of prime agricultural lands and resources, consistency with general and specific plans and affordable housing. So the most logical location in this list for ag mitigation policies would be in subsection D here. And if the Commission does direct us to move forward, that is where we are recommending such policies be included. So we developed 3 policy options for the Commission. These are based on the information that was received at the workshop, primarily from the Department of Conservation. As you'll recall, they presented a list of items that would most likely, or that do result in the most effective forms of ag mitigation. So these items are primarily those that were discussed by the Department of Conservation. So this is the first option, and our recommended additional language is that which is red and underlined. So I will just read it from the beginning. So conversion of prime agricultural lands to urban uses and protection and preservation of prime agricultural lands and resources. So the new or recommended would be for projects that would result in the conversion of prime agricultural land to non-agricultural uses. The environmental document should consider and evaluate potential mitigation measures to address the loss of that agricultural land. Mitigation measures and related factors to be considered and evaluated should include the following. Now, these are the items that were discussed by the Department of Conservation. Number 1, measures to preserve prime agricultural land, including but not necessarily limited to agricultural conservation easements, agricultural land mitigation bank and credits, fee title, or fees in lieu of agricultural conservation easements, agricultural land mitigation bank and credits, or fee title. 2, permanent preservation of other prime agricultural land, such as in a 1-to-1 ratio or greater to that proposed to be converted. 3, preservation of land of a similar soil quality and or classification as that proposed to be converted. 4, preservation of land that possesses the related resources, water, drainage, etc., to ensure that ongoing agricultural production would be viable. And preservation of land located within Ventura County and not necessarily within the lead agency's sphere of influence. Now, we added that last sentence about the sphere of influence because we have reviewed a couple of environmental impact reports that incorrectly state that any mitigated land would have to be located within that agency's sphere of influence, which is just not accurate. So we thought that
Mr.
we
Chair,
would address that here.
Can you give us an example of that?
Yes. The most recent example was with the Conejo Creek project outside of Camarillo. We had asked that the environmental impact report evaluate ag mitigation, and they limited it to just available ag land within the city's sphere of influence, and that completely restricted looking outside.
It could have been
that
any
sphere.
other location then?
Correct.
Okay.
Right. And there's just no basis for that. So those are the proposals for option 1, and I just want to mention that these are just shoulds. So it would be that the cities and or districts would be encouraged to include this within their environmental document.
Also, as Supervisor Zaragoza was talking, that one issue, because we're the Ventura LAFCo, is that why there's kind of a nexus? It can go anywhere in Ventura County, the mitigation?
Not necessarily. I think the mitigation would be be the the responsibility of the city in this instance. So I guess it would be up to the city to evaluate where within the county that would be. This is just encouraging them to look, not just in their sphere, but anywhere in the county for lands that can be mitigated.
And as opposed to in LA County, like we had a project once where they removed trees in Sherwood and they made up for it in a woodland in LA County, which I objected to. It seems like it should stay within our county, but I just wonder if there's some kind of nexus that says to a city, if you're going to do it, it has to be within the county of Ventura, and it certainly can go beyond your city limits.
I think that's probably a policy call. Yeah. Every mitigation policies that I've seen say it needs to be within the county because this is the county that's being affected.
Because LA County has their LAFCo. I don't know if that's what it's about or not.
It's not a legal requirement. The mitigation could potentially be anywhere. So with respect to this proposed language, I think it's the idea that at least if you were to adopt this language, that the commission is telling the cities and the special districts, we want you to at least look in Ventura County and tell us you've looked in Ventura County to see what's available. It doesn't necessarily restrict any mitigation to Ventura County, nor would that be legally enforceable.
I guess maybe also would be determined partially on what is the mitigation we're talking about. That type of mitigation, and there's several different ones, may be more appropriate, if it's like a fiscal one, for example, or that it be within the area. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Okay, so that's the first option. The second option is very similar to the first. However, it just does not include the last two items as far as the consideration. So what is not here is the factor about the land to be preserved, must have water and drainage, et cetera, to ensure ongoing agricultural viability, and then also that it be located within the county of Ventura and not necessarily within a sphere of influence. And then option 3 would eliminate all reference to specific types of mitigation that should be evaluated and what factors should be evaluated, instead just referencing the government code section where this information can be found, and basically leave it up to the city to determine the extent to which they're going to evaluate mitigation measures and the different considerations. So those are the 3 options. And I did want to mention one more thing. Oh, here's the table that I included in there. I don't know if you want me to go over this, but it's in your staff report. And it just includes, these are the different factors that the Department of Conservation identified. And these are the different options and whether they include those factors or not. So option 1 includes all of those factors. Option 2 includes 5 of the 7. And option 3 includes just 1 of the 7. So again, that's in your staff report. I did want to mention that after your last workshop on this item, John Christ, who's the executive director with the Farm Bureau, wrote me a letter that I attached to your staff report providing some additional information about agriculture, but also expressing the Farm Bureau's support of the Commission adopting policies to encourage cities and districts to look, at least evaluate ag mitigation for projects that are likely to convert prime agricultural land. So, and that's my staff report, and the recommendation is just to direct staff as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. First of all, thank you for your thoroughness. Thank you for following the direction that came out of our workshop and working up some alternative language for us and capturing much of what came out of that workshop. I have a couple of questions, though. The first one is to start with kind of the prompter of this. In terms of our role as a responsible agency, have you been able to identify those kind of, shall I say, bad actors, those communities that haven't been very good at looping you in during the environmental process, and have we reached out to them to talk to their city managers or I don't suppose it's districts, it's more often cities, but city managers and planning directors to make sure that there's some kind of a mailing list that our agency is on?
Yeah, we routinely interact with the community development directors, primarily the community development directors and planning directors of the different cities, to encourage that we be included in the process at the very get-go. Our goal, we often are included in the notices of preparation when the project goes out. However, we are always trying to get involved before we get to that notice of preparation. We would like to get involved in the process to help identify the issues that need to be evaluated that might be outside of the CEQA process, and that might be some fatal flaw to this project, and try to address that issue before the environmental document even gets released. So for the most part, I would say that the cities and districts are pretty good about getting us the NOPs. They're not always great about adequately responding to our comments, and they're not always great about providing us with notice that some type of action is going to be happening on the environmental document.
Well, sitting up here as one of the two city reps and having some conversations with some of the community development directors from some of the cities, I mean, I understand it's a two-way street, but again, we have to, I guess, because we have to put on a different hat here, but the question is that how much do we do in terms of interference with the autonomy of those cities? I mean, they take a path to do their environmental document. They kind of take a roll of the dice, and then it sounds like what you're saying is you want to make sure, for your purposes, the evaluation of this agency, that you'd like to throw a 2 cents worth in very early on in a proposal for a city before they start their environmental process, and I'm trying to figure out the appropriateness of that, and I mean, I understand trying to fulfill your job and our obligations up here, but I guess I'm wrestling with that issue.
Well, if you recall, several years ago, this issue came up, and the commission directed staff to prepare a letter to provide to potential applicants. And that was outside the CEQA process. That was intended to get the cities or districts to meet with LAFCo to identify issues that are likely to come out, whether it's in the environmental process or outside the environmental process. And so that's what we do. We actually have that letter, and we send that out with all correspondence. We will typically monitor agendas. We'll monitor other actions of the city to try to identify where LAFCO is going, some type of LAFCO action is going to be required, and then provide some hopefully helpful information at that point to address issues before they become issues later on at the LAFCO process. So this would be just for the CEQA document. So this outreach would be that if you're going to prepare a CEQA document that's going to require LAFCO action, then these items should be in that CEQA document.
Well, that brings me to the second question, and in terms of the language that's being offered here, I will just tell you, kind of a knee-jerk reaction, and maybe I've spent too long with the League of California Cities, where we would quickly run up the flagpole, local control. But when you say in every one of these instances, even though shall is the mandatory, when we say should, does that mean you intend to look over an extremely fine-line checklist of they didn't look at this, they didn't look at this, they didn't look at this, and therefore we're going to reject their environmental document? Because I anticipate a lot of blowback. I would rather say could. Should is starting to sound like if you didn't hit the checklist, community, and you're bringing us an environmental document, we're going to kick it out. And I don't know if that's exactly the path we want to go down. That's why I'm certainly more leaning towards the compromise would be the second option, and the third option would be even better in a broader perspective. I don't want to be extremely prescriptive about what's supposed to be in there. I think we all recognize from the workshops that there's a number of good things that can be done to address mitigation for the loss of ag land, but I'm really concerned about being extremely prescriptive, and I know we have a couple of speaker cards and we'll anticipate some feedback on that, but commissioners, go ahead. Commissioner Zaragoza.
I was just going to ask, I think what we're trying to accomplish is to help the lead agencies respond to the proper CEQA protocol, if you want to call it that. In essence, a responsible agency help them out with those with that effort. Is that?
Yeah, essentially, absolutely. Yeah. And then, this does express the Commission's desire to see an evaluation that the Commission's actions that will ultimately lead to that conversion has been adequately evaluated in that environmental document, including mitigation measures.
Because in the past, many years ago when I was in LAFCO, we had concerns of developers or the city saying, how come LAFCO didn't tell us before we got here? Mm-hmm. And I remember those times. In this way, at least, the lead agency knows exactly what the responsible agency needs, and maybe that might help. I think that's what you're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, certainly front-loading, will help.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. And this, because these are shoulds, from a staff perspective, we're not going to refuse an environmental document that didn't include this. I mean, that's up to the lead agency. We can say we really would like you to, you really should, but ultimately it's up to the lead agency whether they do or to what extent they do. Now, if the commission feels that it's not adequate, then our only recourse is to challenge it in court. But because these are shoulds, I wouldn't reject it if it wasn't completely, inclusive of these items.
Appreciate that clarification. Commissioner Parks.
I agree with you. The idea that what we're doing is presenting a palette of potential options, and so could sounds right there. But in the first sentence, it says, for projects that would result in the conversion of prime ag land to non-ag uses, the environmental document should consider and evaluate potential mitigation measures to address the loss of agricultural land. That would actually legally supposed to be a shall, since it's already a state law. But I think the second one, which is should, it should include these. It should say it could include these. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think the problem we've wrestled with is when an environmental document comes to us and we feel like the entity, and let's be specific, generally cities, failed to look at what they recognize as the loss of ag land adequately in terms of preservation or mitigation to that, and that's been problematic, and we understand that. The problem is, I also don't know if we can get too far ahead and start, being very specific about what we'd like to see on that list. They can choose or choose not to do that, and we can offer them a list and say, you might think about this,
Right.
but I don't want to get too heavy-handed.
But you are
with that.
talking about the second sentence in red,
Yes.
not the first.
Correct.
Thank you.
Alternate Commissioner Rooney.
Thank you. So as I recall, the end result of the meeting last time at Part 2, that the direction was to consider. And now we've gone from consider to consider and evaluate the mitigation. And so, I don't know if it's a legal answer or not, but I mean, are we looking at the legal definitions of what consider means? And now we've added and evaluate and tagged that on, which, as I recall, the last final discussion was, sure, they can consider it. They can consider it. What does that mean? Well, I suppose that's the devil in the details, right? But what does consider mean? They can go, we've considered it, and yes, we can move on. When we now add consider and evaluate, then you tack on this and this and this and this and this. I mean, every one of those is a separate evaluation of what that impact may be. It's another study. It's another layer that the applicant has to jump through, that perhaps they've already done all this anyways, and we do it yet again. And then it adds the additional cost. So it seems like it's just, suppressing what the applicant is trying to accomplish through the process that CEQA already has in place. And then, as the Ag Commissioner stated, there are like 8 different layers already that they need to go through. So in each one of these options here, we added in and evaluate. And where in the staff report at the beginning here it said, that the staff was directed to, bring it back to consider mitigation measures. So I want to be very clear about what it is that we're looking at here.
I appreciate that. Commissioner Freeman?
That's a very good point. I didn't pick up on it, but I want to thank staff for their efforts here. And I just have to say I have thought long and hard about this issue since the last Ag workshop, and thought about the comments of the Ag Commissioner, and thought about all of the controls we have in Ventura County. I mean, that besides the general plan, the farm ordinance, SOAR, guidelines for orderly development, California Land Conservancy Act, green belts, 40-acre ag exclusive minimum lot size, 5% maximum lot coverage. And if Congress approves, we have now the Rim of the Valley corridor, which will affect open space in the East County, not up here. With SOAR, we have curb lines, and those that are inside the curb have all been anticipated for development. So I can see that the EIR should evaluate, or we should look at. But I think that those lands have always been anticipated for development by cities as part of their growth plan. And we have pressures because we still have pressures for housing. Those outside the curb have to go to a vote of the people. And as part of that, there is a natural evolution of mitigation that comes, like in Santa Paula, with the vote out there. And then there are public projects, which could be schools or county, or that may not need to be annexed, but are utilizing ag land. And I think when those EIRs are done, the public agency generally makes a finding of overriding consideration because, number one, they can't afford to do the mitigation. And that's because ag land is very expensive in Ventura County. We have been recognized as having probably in the nation the most conservation-oriented rules and regulations to preserve open space in agriculture. But I am not sure how to say this, but I'll just say that it seems that if we are going to, once we set a policy and ask cities mainly to look at mitigation, those become really rules that everybody's going to have to follow. And I think we do more with our current policies than any other county in the state. And those 4 that have ag mitigation policies as part of LAFCo don't have all the other things that we have. So I think we could pat ourselves on the back for all that we do. But I'm not sure we need to do more because to me it becomes problematic in implementing because the cost of ag land and the cost of open space is so horrendous that it's difficult to mitigate. And so I'm going to take a different position. I actually can only support option 3 because it requires the lead agency to look at it, and it meets the obligation of CEQA. But at the same time, it doesn't penalize, say, the city or the lead agency or the applicant. I think we have an obligation to enforce CEQA, but how far do we go? And so I've given this a lot of thought, and I really feel that the ag community, which is private enterprise, they want to farm. And probably all the land that's suitable for farming is being farmed. And those that are within the sphere or within the curb lines are transitional properties anyway. And so even though the EIR addresses it, I don't see how there can be mitigation for something that's been anticipated.
Okay. Commissioner Parks?
Yeah, I don't see it as anything onerous, the second part, other than it's saying, and here's examples of what you could do. That's at least what I wanted to, if we could reword it. I just think it's valuable to just, instead of saying you have to, obey CEQA and consider mitigation measures, which is state law, and I don't know if you want to change state law so you don't have to do that anymore, but that is state law. I just thought it would be helpful to give best management practices. Here are options of ways to mitigate. It's not saying you have to in any form, but I just like the idea of giving them suggestions on ways. So we could even write it that way. These are suggested ways.
I just think once you put it down on paper and say suggested ways, it obligates them to do it.
Okay.
Could we find a way to, outside of putting it in our handbook like this and enumerating it, is there another way that we could convey to, particularly, again, generally it's cities that are going through the process, a list of things that they could consider? This comes back to Alternate Commissioner Rooney's question about, when we started out the door from the workshop saying what you could consider. And Commissioner Parks, I hear you. I mean, again, there are a number of things that probably could be looked at, should be looked at, but in light of Commissioner Freeman's comments, again, much of this land, which is already in the spheres and intended for annexation anyway, There's two sides to the argument. I'm sure we'll have at least one of our public speakers, and we'll get to them in a second, to say that ag land is ag land, and if it's being farmed, even if it's on paper as residential, i.e., I can think of one community who's currently going through that process, and highly visible from Highway 101, but it was being farmed and now it's being turned into houses. Okay, so you say, well, there's a loss of ag land. Yes, real, it is, but on paper, it never was. So are we adding an extra layer of review that's, necessary or not? Is it overkill? Because we already have a bunch of other processes in place that review this stuff. So I'm kind of wrestling with that.
What you're saying is put an asterisk and have it done.
Well, another asterisk, but I'm reluctant to embed that in our handbook if it's interpreted by our staff or somehow or another interpreted by, it becomes mandatory for us, because I'm real reluctant to look at some other jurisdictions. I mean, they should know what they're doing. Maybe they don't. If they should, and we should give them a list and says, hey, you might think about these things. But if we start ticking down a list, it suddenly gets us into a sticky situation where we're not happy with their environmental document. It gets pretty muddy pretty quickly. Alternate Commissioner Rooney.
Thank you. I'd like to go back. What I heard Commissioner Parks say was that she wanted to consider and give options. And I supported that at that time. What's written here does not reflect that. And so my question, since I'm still learning about all of the rules and regulations and where they come from and how they fall, so if it is indeed currently under Government Section Code 65965, as outlined in Option 3, if it's already there, then why do we need to list out suggestions already? I mean, I'm not a fan of reinventing the wheel, and if something already exists there, then we can point to that and go, there, consider that. But to add the layer of evaluate provides an issue.
And Kai, were you able to, or Michael, able to provide for us that Government Section Code 65965 and subsequent?
I don't have a copy of it with me, but it does not include all of these items here. It is in a different context. I touched on it briefly in part one of the Ag Mitigation Workshop, which was now many months ago for all of us.
Yeah, if you'd refresh our memory, please.
But it provides for voluntary agricultural conservation easements in certain contexts. So I think the intent of the language in Option 3 would be to take the reader to what an ag conservation easement is, as defined in that statutory section. So it really is not. It's an apple to an orange. It doesn't include all of these or any of these items that are listed here. I think it's a way to, not to put words in Mr. Loma's mouth, but I think Option 3 is a way to give some context, without actually pointing out ag conservation easement, but to give some context for someone to look at and say, okay, that's maybe what LAFCo has in mind.
But that, okay, and that being the case, again, in deference to Commissioner Parks' concerns, though, about giving better guidance for best management practices, it sounds like that section of the government code doesn't elaborate to the level that this elaborates. But the question then again is, do we wish to embed this level of detail in our own procedures that may be interpreted to getting a little stickier than maybe we want to get into? It's above and beyond our role, our pay grade. So other thoughts, because I'm going to open it up. I do have a couple of public speaker cards, and I think we might benefit the dialogue from those. So if with that, I will open up the public portion. And one of our main important people is Commissioner Gonzalez. Henry, would you like to address us?
Thank you, Carl. Members of the Commission, Henry Gonzalez here, Agricultural Commissioner, County of Ventura. Wanted to address a letter. So I would like to correct a misimpression that the CEO of the Farm Bureau may have created with his letter to you. And as a matter of fact, his statement is that he would like to correct a misrepresentation that I may have made, and where he says that while it is true that some experimental trials have indicated non-soil substrates may eventually play a role in production of some specialty crops, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I want to point out that this is not experimental. And one example that he actually uses in here, but doesn't quite do it justice, I believe, is Howling Nursery. Howling Nursery has 125 acres under glass. Yes, it costs $1 million per acre. But let me tell you the benefits of Howling Nursery. They have reduced the typical water consumption of a greenhouse by 66%. This is great considering the drought that we're experiencing. Also, they have solar electricity that is saving about 16 million kilowatts of energy per year. That will avoid more than 1.5 million pounds of CO2 emissions annually. Also, they, in partnership with Agrimin, they take 15,000 tons of organic matter each year and have it converted into a reusable material for us. Each acre at Howling Nursery is equal to 24 acres in the open areas in regards to their production. Their water is recycled over and over and over again and adjusted for nutritional pH and other needs of the plants. This is not an experiment. It is not a trial. It is our reality. And that's just one example. There's other similar operations. We actually have, in addition to greenhouses like Howling's, out in the open, we have 2,275.66 acres of containerized plants. And these are, again, plants that are not growing in the soil, they're growing in substrate in these containers. This is not experimental. It is what we are actually already doing. Another statement in the letter. While it is true packing and processing facilities contribute to the economic sustainability of agriculture, it is short-sighted to suggest these are most appropriately sited on finite and shrinking supply of prime ag land. Well, that was only an example that I gave of processing and packing plants. I gave other examples. Business that are supply business to agriculture, ancillary ag businesses, and farm worker housing were also suggestions that I made about what we could do on some of our land, because I was making the point that's not mentioned in there that it is water that is our limiting factor, not land. And so my suggestion is that we could use some of that land that's more marginal, less quality water, that we could use that to help keep ag fiscally sustainable. The other statement that in the letter is, although experiments have been conducted to evaluate hydroponic/substrate production as an alternative growing strategy for strawberries, primarily to avoid the increasingly problematic use of pre-plant soil fumigants, the shrinking profit margin in strawberries already has resulted in a 34% decrease in planted acreage in the past 3 years in Ventura County. And so I want to take exception to this assertion that it is primarily to avoid the increasingly problematic use of pre-plant soil fumigants. I spoke with the Strawberry Commission just before I came here to ask them, is that correct? And they said no. There's other issues, farm labor and drought. This is why we are reducing the acres statewide and here in Ventura County of strawberry production. It is not primarily, as was suggested in the letter, to avoid the increasingly problematic use of pre-plant Because it is, again, the water is our limiting factor. Now, there was a statement in here that I fully agree. It says ending statement. It said Farm Bureau of Ventura County opposes the conversion of agricultural land to non-agricultural purposes except in limited instances when it is necessary to resolve incompatible adjacent uses or to provide for rational planning and orderly community development. I agree with that statement, but I'm asserting that we can put packing, processing facilities. Yes, they need sewage and other things like that, but also there's ag supply companies, and farm worker housing is what we desperately need in here to address the issue that we certainly have some control over. So just in the interest of trying to dispel any misrepresentations that I or Mr. Christ created, I wanted to share those comments with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. In terms of clarifying both your comments from the workshop and Mr. Christ's letter to us, I guess we're still wrestling, though, in terms of this agency's review process. When we receive an application, generally from a city, that wishes to annex land that has been in some kind of ag capacity, the issue we're wrestling with is whether or not their environmental document adequately addresses that potential loss of farmland. And so I guess the guidance I'm seeking out of you is you had an opportunity to review what staff has brought us and your thoughts on any of the three options, and is it appropriate for this agency to enumerate and list in our own policies for guidance to our staff to evaluate the environmental document from the incoming community with those criteria, understanding the importance of ag. Clearly, as you've indicated, and I think many of our constituents throughout the county are often confused because sometimes they see wonderful orchards or fields of green, and their minds are thinking, well, that's open space, not thinking ag as a business. I don't think they all see a field of howlings out all across the entire Oxnard Plain. But that being the case, when we're losing, even if it's grazing land or something through an annexation, are our tools that we have for evaluation of an environmental document adequate? Should we list more? Or should we be content with what's set in state law? Your guidance on that would be appreciated.
Well, considering all of the other measures that I articulated in the first mitigation workshop that are already in place and already watching over our ag land, I'm not sure that any further is necessary. I think that we are already doing a great job in helping us stay in the top 10 ag-producing counties while next to the megalopolis of Los Angeles. I don't know that we need to add anything, that LAFCo needs to add anything into their handbooks. I do think that some of these jurisdictions need to be scrutinized in what they're doing. If they are merely allowing land to be developed to help shore up their budgets, I'm not sure that that's the best way to do that. I think that staff should be able to recognize who these entities are, that if they're doing that, and pull that to their attention. I would say that the staff has an opportunity to review their documents to see if what they considered or what they did consider, to call them and ask them, did you consider this, did you consider that? And I would want to do that specifically for the bad players that somebody mentioned in here. If there's somebody who's doing that, then I don't think it's out of line to ask them about what they're doing, but to put something additional into the commissioner's handbook is a bit presumptuous as well. So I would say that if any of the options are adopted, it would be number 3, with perhaps direction the staff to identify if they see something that doesn't seem right, to bring it to the commission's attention for further direction.
Is your department normally also a responsible agency? So when cities are looking at annexations and it's affecting ag land, are they required to notify you, and do you comment, and do you offer up a list similar to the ones we've been looking at here at best practices as how to mitigate the impacts?
In the other areas that I have jurisdiction for, I have jurisdiction over the entire county. In the realm of land use, I do not have any jurisdiction over in the cities. However, the cities do, as a courtesy, send that information to me and allow us an opportunity to opine on whatever project they are considering. I mean, the schools do that too.
Right.
But then in the end, they say, well, we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, but you have the opportunity at least to comment and say,
Yes.
we recognize that you're taking 5 acres or 10 acres out of prime land, out of production or grazing land, and we would offer that you consider these things as the impacts or the offsets in your environmental analysis?
We do.
Okay. Questions of Mr. Gonzalez from Commissioner Zaragoza?
Kai, aren't we looking as a responsible agency to help the lead agencies? I'm a little confused here. I thought that was the whole idea here, is to help those the lead agencies. As we're talking about CEQA, we're talking about what their responsibilities are, and also our responsibilities as a responsible agency.
Right. It would help the cities prepare
And
environmental documents that address LAFCo's concerns and policies.
I thought that's what we were talking about, but we're, in my mind, I think we're commingling things, but maybe I'm not.
Whether you should develop farmland
Or prime land, or develop prime land, or
Commissioner Parvin.
Anyway.
I was just going to say, I think what Kai's communicated to us is that the applicants aren't fulfilling, and there's a gap. And they're not, even though he's telling them that we need this, they're not doing it.
They're not
or they're
following.
ignoring it or whatever. Am I right? I mean, I think that's what kind of got us here.
That pretty much sums it up, yes.
Exactly.
And that's kind of why I was begging whether the Ag Commissioner's Office is also a recipient during the initial review, and they have a chance to weigh in on offering up best management practices when they see a loss of what's defined as something as important as ag.
And I think his input is important to us too, but I think us as responsible agency need to help the lead agencies get from point A to point B.
Additional Commissioner questions of
I think
the Ag
Kai
Commissioner?
wants to help them. I think they're just not listening, maybe. I mean, and is there a particular organization, which you do not have to name right now, that continues to kind of be this particular organization that has brought us to this point?
Yes and no.
Okay.
There are some organizations that, due to staffing levels, rely heavily on a developer to prepare the environmental documents. So often, I think what might be happening is that we will provide comments, this really needs to be included in your EIR and evaluated, and staff will give that on to the consultant. And the consultant will address it in a way he or she feels, in doing so. And I think that's why, like the EIR for the Conejo Creek project came up with this idea, well, we can get out of having to evaluate other farmland by just saying it has to be within the sphere. So I think that was a call on not the city's part, but on the consultant's part.
Got it.
But as you indicated, as a consultant, I want to clarify, applicants generally, I don't think there's any legal entity today that allows an applicant to prepare their own document. It's all overseen by the jurisdiction. The applicant may be paying the freight but the consultant should be an independent body, and the city has the oversight of the environmental document by the consultant.
Right. There are organizations that do allow a developer to prepare environmental documents. I don't know that
But
any
it's
of
under
them-
the oversight of the lead agency with the
Ultimately,
direction of the
absolutely.
lead agency, because there has to be sort of a firewall in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately,
Okay.
the lead agency is responsible for everything that's
That's
in
right.
that document. And they will either review it themselves for adequacy or hire a consultant to review the other consultant's work for adequacy on behalf of the city or the jurisdiction.
So
absolutely.
So if LAFCO had a policy that directs that prime ag land to non-agriculture uses, the environmental document should consider and possibly evaluate mitigation measures. That is the direction you need to give to the lead agency.
That would be helpful if the goal of the commission is to have environmental documents that include the discussion of mitigation measures.
That meet CEQA.
Right. Right.
Okay, I have another speaker card, and Lynn Jensen. Lynn, you've been sitting out there patiently. Would you like to address us?
Thank you, Chair Morehouse and Commissioners. CoLab today is calling for balance from the LAFCo commissioners who represent the county, cities, and special districts. There needs to be a balance between growth prescribed in general plans and the need to keep agricultural lands from being unnecessarily converted to urban uses, and that's really what we're talking about here. While the information presented has shown some farmland conversion to urban uses, it looks like there was 7% over 20 years, there has also been a significant conversion of hillside and non-productive acreage to productive acreage. In fact, I was talking to a farmer last night who's in Piru that converted 400 acres into farmland in the last 20 years. And the reason why is because it was economic to do so. There was land that was not producing, and it was economic to turn that into avocados and lemons. And we want to keep that. These new orchards have stabilized the amount of irrigated farmlands. The orchards are now nearly half of the irrigated cropland in Ventura County. Conversely, the cities in Ventura County lie on 125,000 acres. That is 10% of the land area in the county. The land area in the county is 1.2 million. And the cities house 90% of our population. 90% of our population lives on 10% of the land. We have been good stewards of the land over time. And because of the strong preservation measures pointed out by Henry Gonzalez, including the guidelines for orderly development and the green belts and the city-urban growth boundaries, conversion has taken place within the city limits, spheres, and curb lines containing growth. The sustained VC ballot measure, our countywide measure that is proposed by farmers, keeps those policies and boundaries intact. And it's important that we do preserve, particularly this core of farmland in the middle of our county. But the patterns of growth have been problematic. There's been hopscotch development, as you know, in the city of Ventura, isolating agricultural parcels in the middle of the city. There's been a lack of adequate buffers, and then the building of public schools in the urban interface. And farmers are finding that with all of the other unprecedented challenges, water, labor, and farmworker housing, the urban conflicts from noise, dust, and pest control are becoming insurmountable. Just last year, the Planning Commission approved a brand new two-story low-income housing development in Piru with the house sidewall, two-story sidewall, 10 feet from a working agricultural land. And these parcels are being trapped, as you know, in the city of Ventura and Oxnard near schools. And in addition, there are important projects, as you guys pointed out, including road widenings that will need to remove some farmland to accommodate progress. But I think in general, we as a county have been very good stewards of the land and of agriculture. Mitigation for loss of farmland is already a requirement in the CEQA process that we've talked about, and it's expressly been required since 2013. How many projects have come to LAFCo for annexation since 2013? Not very many. One of them was Limonera's East Area 1, and it had both agriculture and open space mitigation as part of its EIR. The problem with the proposed options 1 and 2 is that they prescribe this array of studies of infeasible mitigation options, which will mostly apply to projects that are trapped in this urban interface, and that will hinder the options of cities and unnecessarily drive up the cost of new housing. Everything that you prescribe that a city feels that it needs to do is going to lead to a study. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars of study to look at mitigation measures that may or may not make any sense to that city. And particularly suggesting a one-to-one bar for mitigation, I think will seriously impact the economic future of some of these cities. When you guys talked about the word should, we agree that that should not be used because it will require the studies and the cost. Land use planning is not within LAFCO's authority, and the Commission cannot require mitigation measures that would regulate land use. While the lead agencies must consider ag conservation easements and in lieu fees as potential mitigation measures, they are not required to adopt them, and economic feasibility will be a key consideration. As we said, agriculture is a business, and it would be better served by improving the county general plan to facilitate this agricultural production, maintain the water resources for for the ag production. If we don't have the water resources for the 100,000 acres of irrigated land right now, you know what's going to happen. We're not going to have that ag land here. And we need to make a commitment to farm worker housing, as Henry said, and promote research opportunities here to help us overcome some of the pest control issues. LAFCo already has an ag preservation strategy, and it's been working. We recommend that it stays the same. But if the Commission believes it needs to add their policy, we recommend option 3. The one-to-one mitigation bar, we believe, is unfeasible and should not be included in the language. We also think the cities do consider which options make sense for a given project. We're seeing right now is that cities are not rogue. In fact, they're turning down most development projects that come before them for a number of reasons. Maybe you could route these cities to the Department of Conservation website in order for them to look at what they offer. But from our perspective, we believe that at the very most, option 3. So thank you.
Any questions, Luann? Thank you for, I think you understand our dilemma. I mean, we've got this situation where we have entities come to us seeking annexations, looking at their environmental document in light of our criteria, and it sounds like you've done a fairly thorough analysis, so I appreciate your input.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I have no other public speaker cards, so I'll close the public hearing portion of that and turn back to the commissioners as to your thoughts and direction on this. Alternate Commissioner Rooney.
Chair Morehouse, I'd like to make a motion that at this time we reject all options and take no action at this time due to the fact that we already have everything in place. It seems to be working, and we don't need it at this time.
I have a motion.
I'll second for purposes of a vote.
Okay, I have a second. Discussion on the proposed motion. I will express that I won't support that one. I understand, and I think Commissioner Freeman elaborated very well, as did our two public speakers. We have wonderful, wonderful lawyers, and that's why we are the envy. And I can tell you, being past president of SCAG and messing with 6 other counties, we are the envy. But I don't think by exactly status quo is going to get us to ease both our staff and some of our commissioners' attention. So I think that they brought us some options. I think we should consider them. So I will not support the motion. Any other discussion? Okay, with that, I will take a roll call.
Commissioner Cunningham?
No.
Commissioner Freeman?
No.
Commissioner Parks?
No.
Commissioner Parvin?
No.
Commissioner Zaragoza?
No.
Chair Morehouse?
No.
Aye.
Commissioner Rooney, yes.
I'm sorry, Commissioner
All
Rooney.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
Okay.
I will make a
that
motion
fails.
to adopt option 3, which gives Kai and LAFCo the written authority to a little stronger authority going to the lead agencies to adopt option 3.
I would ask that we look at looking at one and changing the wording so that in no way does it apply a requirement in terms of the options. But I think we've gone this far as to really workshops since 2006 identifying all these different kinds of options, not because we are requiring them, but just because we want jurisdictions to look at the potential for it. And I think once they start looking at the potential, they may come up with their own ideas, and that may lead other jurisdictions to consider options too. And I think that's a very good way to go in terms of encouraging. So if you had for projects that would result in, we have that first sentence, I think, in each one of them that you should look at, consider and evaluate the mitigation measures. But that second line, if you said mitigation measures and related factors are not to be, something along the line should be considered. Below is a list that are options that are not required but could be considered. You know, we can just be very clear with that so that in no way are we making this a requirement. Here, below are options that can be considered but are not necessarily required. And
Point
I
of
think that
order.
would take
Okay,
care of that issue.
I have a motion out of Commissioner Freeman. I haven't had a second yet.
I'll second
but-
that motion.
Okay.
And the reason I'm bringing this forward, Chair, is just to say that I don't think the options that staff gave us are the only ones that we need to look at. And so if we're bounding ourselves in a box of, 1, 2, or 3, I think we can still do what we've been working on since 2006, I think it was, and at least giving a list of options, but making it not as staff put as they should, but as
Well,
an option to be
Commissioner
considered.
Parks, you could make a substitute motion. I have one on the floor with a second. So if you'd like to make a second motion, then we'd have to vote on
I'd like
first.
conversation on the first motion.
Well, and then I would then look at the amending the motion to have wording in there that says, here are some options that can be considered but are not required to be
Make a
considered.
motion willing to make an amendment to that effect?
I would like to ask the maker to amend her motion to remove the words "and evaluate." I mean, we went back to the last meeting at part 2 where it was consider and evaluate as a whole nother layer. And so I think that if we look at what this commission decided and voted on at the last meeting, that it's consider and remove the word "and evaluate."
And the maker
I'll
of the
amend the
motion?
motion.
You will accept that? Okay, so the maker of the motion,
Can I have clarification on that? Remove, what was it again?
And evaluate.
Oh, okay.
so the motion is to go with option 3, the wording that was offered by staff, and when you get to the line that says the environmental document should consider and evaluate, eliminate the words "and evaluate." So should consider mitigation measures to address the potential loss of ag land as provided for under Government Code Section 65965 et al. So that's the motion.
Actually, from a parliamentary procedure, when you have an amendment on the floor, you're supposed to vote on the amendment first.
What was offered is a friendly amendment, and the maker of the motion accepted the friendly amendment, so.
Okay, so the amendment was the one that I made. I know there was also a request to remove the word evaluate, and that motion has been amended to include that. So now there's an amendment to that amended motion, and that is to say you can include but isn't required, and we'll give a list of the options.
Okay, I would need a second for that amendment of Commissioner Parks.
Correct. Okay.
To add that to then?
The amendment would be to say, as well as option 3, that's what we have before us, to also say, and here is a list of ways you can mitigate, though they are not required. We're giving them the option.
I'll second that.
Give them the list. Say it's not required. But
Okay.
it gives them the option.
We have an amendment by Commissioner Parks and a second by Commissioner Zaragoza to amend the initial motion, so it would say we would provide a list, and I will speak to that motion. I think it would behoove us to work with staff to create an independent list, but embedding that again into the handbook and our policies and procedures is a little troubling to me. So I will not support the alternative, but I would support it in the form of creating a wonderful list that we can give guidance, but I do not wish to embed it into.
So that's
Yeah.
acceptable to me.
Yeah,
So-
that works for me, too. I just think we've gone through this so many times to just
be
kind
part
of
of the
flush it
handbook,
at this point.
I
It's a lot of work for
understand.
nothing.
I understand, and I'm not trying to brush it all aside. I'm just
We
trying
can
to
go back
be
to the asterisks again.
pragmatic in front. No more asterisks. I already did one in the budget.
Guidelines
I
then.
love
So-
these.
So I have some- I have
List of
some-
guidelines.
So with
I have
the-
questions on that
Okay.
list that we're going to
Okay.
create, so, or potentially create. I guess it goes back to what is LAFCO's role? What is it that we intend on doing? What does CEQA already accomplish under that? Are we complying with our role as staying out of land use? And is that list going to then create that concern? I mean, Mr. Loma has said that he meets with the folks. He follows the agendas. He has that conversation, that communication. So I'm concerned that LAFCO may be overstepping the boundaries with adding another list in here. And frankly, I'm confused on which motion we're actually voting on right now.
Well, we're going to
So-
vote on
Amended
the motion, the amendment offered by Commissioner Parks and seconded by Commissioner Zaragoza which would be to take the original motion and amend it to add the list.
The list, yeah.
So we have to act on that first,
But
technically.
that motion did not include removing the words "and evaluate."
Correct.
Correct.
Yes, it did.
Okay, so maybe you could restate the amendment.
The maker of the motion already changed her motion to remove evaluate, so that's
Yeah.
no longer a question. That one is already a given
Okay.
as part of the motion.
So then the amendment
To add the
says,
list.
option 3, to consider the mitigation measures, and then have a list of
Consider but
potential
are
things
not
to look at.
required.
Potential.
Yeah.
But that list would be separate and apart from
Right.
the
Well,
policies, or,
may
I mean, it would not be part of this.
Policy.
May I offer for clarity then,
Yeah.
that we would go back to, and again, I understand where you're going with this, Commissioner Parks, but could we go back to the original amendment, which would eliminate the word "and evaluate," and then come back with a separate motion?
Sure.
That would
Let's
simply
do
say,
that.
Okay.
now staff, go forward, and this is a list of things that we would like to have, not embedded in our handbook, but presented to applicants every time.
Good
Well,
point.
the motion was to actually have it in the handbook, but it looks like there isn't the support on LAFCo to actually go that far, to actually put a list of potential mitigation measures in the handbook. So because I don't see the support for that, I'll be happy to withdraw my motion, and we can talk about doing a separate list and whether there's at least support for that.
Okay, the motion maker withdraws the motion, the seconder concurs?
Okay.
Okay, so we are back to the original motion, came out of Commissioner Freeman, and seconded by Commissioner Rooney, to follow option 3 with the elimination of the words "and evaluate." So it says, should consider mitigation measures. Does everybody understand that?
Yes.
I think it's important we take a roll call vote, so let's please.
Commissioner Cunningham.
I'm not really sure. Yes.
Commissioner Freeman.
Yes.
Commissioner Parks.
Yes.
Commissioner Parvin.
Yes?
Commissioner Zaragoza.
Yes.
Chair Morehouse.
Yes?
And Commissioner Rooney.
Yes.
Okay. We got through that part. Thank you. Now, so we come back to, though, we all, I think, agree, maybe we don't, but, and I'll try to do that. Let's work on formulating the list of issues that were addressed, best management practices as put forth by Commissioner Parks, that were considered under the first option, that we should be able to create that list or have it available to present, although it will not be mandatory. It will be guidance only. I guess I'll first turn to our legal counsel as how we best could develop that, provide it what we could do. I mean, should it just be a sheet that comes along? Again, there's some reluctance on our part, my part specifically, to embed it in the handbook, but how else can we convey it?
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
We just approved a change to our guidelines, and I think that would be something to convey to the entities, right, the cities, water districts, or what have you. And in conveying that, we could also say, go to this link to find out options, for example, if we want to post it on our website, or we can include the list at that point. But we're already have the opportunity to help educate those who have not been complying, and even those who may have. This might be an opportunity to just kind of take care of it all in one fell swoop, as you would.
Chair Morehouse.
Would an appendix be appropriate to our handbook? I don't know if we've ever done that. We would have this list. No? Okay.
Chair Morehouse.
Yes.
So before we decide a list and agree upon that, if that was the direction today, I'd like more information about the impacts, both positive and negative, about what each one of they may do for the applicants before we move ahead with any kind of list that might be there. I mean, we passed this option today. That gives our staff the opportunity to go and to say, here are some of the things. I mean, it's not the policy, but here's the direction that they'd like to see, without having a list spelled out here. But I would like to see the people that are impacted on this, weigh in before we choose to make a list today.
Well, I might minorly disagree with you there, Alderman Commissioner, in that if you do an environmental analysis and you have these lists, part of the process of environmental analysis is evaluating cause and effect. And so if you undertake some of these, hopefully the consultant and the environmental document would reflect what the impacts would be on the applicant. And if it's going to be a cost thing, that's going to say, well, they're going to have to spend this much money to do it in fee title, or it's going to cost them this much money for a trade for one or whatever. That I would think should come out in the environmental document as it is. So I don't know if I'm predisposed to say I want to know what the impacts are going to be on an applicant by looking at this list of things. So,
I think,
Commissioner Freeman.
though the impacts would come out during the environmental evaluation.
Well, they should. I
on
mean,
the mitigation.
if the environmental analysis is thorough,
Yeah.
and keep in mind that environmental document is not an economic impact document,
Right.
although that's an
That
option
should
of
be.
jurisdictions, that they can do that. CEQA has gone all kinds of strange directions since it was first, inception, and most of that's been decided by the courts, unfortunately. It's not by the legislature or anybody who intended anything. We're stuck with what these interpretations by people who usually make criminal law decisions instead of land use decisions are doing to us. But that's beside the point. The fact of the matter is, though, when you're doing an evaluation and you would look at any of these potential mitigation measures, that hopefully you would know what the cause and effect would be, the impact would be on an applicant. So I don't know that I'm withheld from suggesting a list of things to look at because I don't know what the impacts are going to be on an applicant. That's not really here nor there. That will happen in the process. We're just offering up a list that says you're going to convert something that we've identified as ag land.
Isn't this kind of just food for thought kind of thing?
Well, or guidelines, yeah.
You're right.
Guidelines.
Yeah.
Now, if the jurisdiction blatantly chooses to ignore it,
Then it's a different.
and then never evaluated it, and comes to us and we said, did you even think about this? Because we kind of suggested you might. Then we might take a position as an agency and say that we could think their environmental documents less than adequate for our purposes.
And it's a responsible party if they want our, approved.
So, dilemma. We have a potential list. How can we best convey that to applicants?
It's also Kai, too.
Well, either way, Kai.
Are you asking me how I would hope you would direct?
Well, that's a possibility too. Short of putting it in the handbook, yes.
I think that if the commission just gave us direction to include that EIRs, that we encourage the cities to include consideration of these different items, not require, but just we encourage you to include these items in your EIR as part of the letter. Okay, we've adopted policy saying that you should, but as part of that, we really encourage you to consider this in doing that evaluation.
But if we use the word encourage and they come back and we're not satisfied, I'm a little cautious. I mean, words can mean so much, and I'm a little cautious about, we'll feel like you didn't pay attention to us because, I don't know. I would rather give them some kind of guidelines and say, these are things, we think probably prudent for you to look at.
Well, that would be appropriate then for the guidelines that the commission has adopted in the handbook. I mean, that's the purpose of those guidelines, is that it should be in there.
Go back to the asterisk.
Right.
But I have a feeling you're coming back to strengthening the motion that was already taken.
Well,
and all we're saying is, or what I think is being said, when you get into the process, here's a list of possible ways.
Guidelines.
It doesn't mean that it's become part of the guidelines
right.
of LAFCo. It's simply a suggestion, and they will have to do the evaluation.
And I can convey that in letters without having a separate attachment, just that we suggest you look at these items.
I think when it gets into the letter, it's interpreted, having been on the side of environmental preparation, I think it's looked on as a doctrine.
How about if we have
If it's in the letter, I think you can say, here's an attachment, here are some things that are done statewide or through the conservation agency, but I think if it's in a letter and lists different options, then it becomes doctrine.
Right.
Can I make a motion to just put it on our website, options, here are options for consideration for removal of ag land, mitigation of ag land. And you can even cite, these are ones used in Sonoma, these are ones, but just give them a list, and then what we can do, and we send out information about our new change. Say you can find out options on, potential mitigation options on our website.
I think if you direct links to other agencies, but if you put that on there, then that is the doctrine of this agency, and I think it's implied.
You just,
that is
again,
what it is.
I think we're trying to
we're just referring
be so
them to-
careful to just say, here are options. How dare, to me, it's just, we can definitely put a list of these are options that are being used throughout the state of California that for you to consider.
And refer them to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's
What if
difficult
we-
to actually get them, these options in the EIR without having them written somewhere that we can direct them to. So I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing we don't want them written anywhere, but we want them adhered to. And we want them
It's not
adhered to and
adhered.
written somewhere, but not to the policy. So-
I'm a little antsy at adhere.
It's not adhered, it's to consider. I think that when you start talking about semantics here,
Well, right.
adhered means that you have to comply with that, and that's not what we said here.
No, that's the concern, that if they are written, then the
Exactly.
interpretation would be that they were adhered to. So,
Exactly.
Right, so I'm hearing two things, that there's an effort to want to get these in there by writing them somewhere and conveying them, but then also not having them written somewhere.
Well, how about this? If you can take the list, and you can, and also provide linkages to jurisdictions that utilize them, and then if you wish to append that to a letter and say that the agency, the commission has evaluated or looked at, how can I best express this? The commission is attentive to and concerned with the loss of ag land, and hopes that your environmental document would consider the following list of ways to address that loss, and then have that list. That should be adequate. Again, I'm trying to get past this mandatory feeling.
They're options, for options on, for potential options of looking at mitigation measures, go to our website, and, you can have, you have a list of 5 options right here. That's all we're doing.
They're not required,
Yeah.
but encouraged.
Yeah, we're encouraged. Yeah.
And you could also say on the list
them
that this
options,
is not
use the word
all-inclusive, and that there are, some organizations are more creative, and they may come up with something
So,
as well.
The words encourage, options, it's not all-inclusive.
Suggest, how about suggest? That we suggest you
Suggestion.
review.
But that doesn't go back to the initial conversation of why we're having this discussion. If you have non-compliant applicants, you can list all day long on your website encouraging words, and if they're going to ignore it, they're going to ignore it. So, I think it defeats the purpose. I think it's at this point that we trust our staff to communicate what the commission has decided and what the direction, the commission goes. That's where we trust our staff to articulate that.
Well, we've gained a lot of ground with that, haven't we? Okay.
Can I move that we do put one on our website, suggested options?
If it's suggested options and it's not perceived of as mandatory, we can certainly have our executive director in his initial communications with applicants and with the agencies that are seeking annexation.
And point out they're not all-inclusive.
They're not all-inclusive,
Yes.
that they could,
And it's
that they
as
could
an
go to this
information.
list on our website and look at alternatives.
Right. It's an information item, essentially.
But I don't want to make it, if they haven't come back and done those things, I don't know if we want to be beating them up.
Maybe we'll get there this time with the non-compliant agencies, and we'll see if there's any improvement. If not, then
And as
back on.
Supervisor Zaragoza was saying too, this is to help them. And if we're concerned about the wordsmithing, bring it back at the next meeting before we post anything, so we can agree to the wording on how we're going to present it on the website.
I would concur with Commissioner
So that
Parks. That's what I
motion-
was going to suggest, is that we take a look at how you were going to word this and approach with the agencies, and we can take a look at it.
Okay.
Alternate Commissioner Ramirez.
Only that I think it's very helpful for, my iPad's not working, I can't pull it up, for people to have access to information about what other communities, cities are doing. And I don't know if that's on our website at all, information for the public that is non-mandatory, but just informational, educational for everybody, not just applicants, might resolve some of the concern about forcing people into boxes. Just an idea.
Okay, why don't we leave it at this then? The suggestion is that rather than jumping right out of the gate on this one, you'll bring it back at our next meeting, and that you'll work with legal counsel on trying to find a way to wordsmith that so that we can have something to look at and say that this would be something we would want on our website to direct and help guide.
Okay, and this would be the list from option 1?
They would be utilizing,
Okay.
the list of best practices that are listed in option 1, rather than embedding them, though, directly in the handbook in this fashion. Okay, are we in agreement there? General head nodding?
Yes.
Okay. With that, then,
Do you need a motion then?
I don't know, we formally need a motion, Michael, do we? I don't think so. Okay. So with that, then, we are at the stage where I think we've concluded that, and we are on to the informational items for the applications received, and those are in front of us, and the executive officer's report. Mr. Holman?
Right, yeah, I just wanted to point out that one of the items under informational items is LAFCO 1604. It's an out-of-agency service agreement. Typically, out-of-agency service agreements do not come before the commission for a determination. However, pursuant to your policies, because this project is based on a mitigated negative declaration, it does require your action. So I believe Rochelle will be handing out the MND today before you leave, so you have that to review. Those who prefer electronic copies, we will email that to you in the next day or so. So, other than that, the next LAFCo meeting will be on May 18th.
Commissioners' reports or questions? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just realized that the California Special Districts Association State Conference is on May 18th, 17 and 18, so I will not be here.
Okay. Commissioner Rooney? Oh,
At this time, I'm scheduled to be in town.
okay.
Yeah. Everybody else is good for that date, the 18th? Okay. Okay, with that then, no further business, anything for the good of the cause, then we stand adjourned. Thank you, staff. Thank you all for your participation.